Welcome back, Augustonians. I'm wishing you another happy Friday and a happy Friday to our newcomers as well. My name is Jessica Lene. I'm a poet, essayist, art journalist, and the host and curator of Lit Friday. Lit Friday occurs at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the final Friday of each month and features creators and thinkers from the African diaspora. Previous guests include journalists such as Nelson George and Danielle Smith, photographers like Nona Faustine and Ming Smith, fiction writers such as the Man Booker Award winner Bernardine Evaristo and National Book Award shortlister Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, and poets such as Philip B. Williams and Yona Harvey. On Friday, October 25th, the next month coming up at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are honored to have Dr. Mecca Jamila Sullivan for a conversation about her novel, Big Girl, which was a New York Times editor's choice. Before I share a brief introduction to tonight's events, I want to give a congratulations to the August Wilson African American Cultural Center for their Pittsburgh International Jazz Festival event. Sima Funk, a Latin American Grammy Award winner, was there. Robert Glasper was there. We had a great time, and I want you to be attentive to the August Wilson African American Cultural Center YouTube because we're going to be releasing footage and videos from the events. And if you weren't there and you missed it, it's going to be invaluable for you to look at. Tonight is extremely special because the August Wilson African American Cultural Center welcomes incredible writers, community activists, and dynamic creators, Malika Aisha, Jehoiada Calvin, Louis Ortiz Fonseca, Tirza Shepard, and Ivanova Veras de Jesus. All are contributors to the University of Arizona Press Anthology, When Language Broke Open, an anthology of queer and trans Black writers of Latin American descent. This is a beautiful cover. This book was edited by Alan Pelaez Lopez, also an incredible, phenomenal poet, scholar, essayist, and I think everyone here would agree, an amazing friend. I'm going to pass this along to Alan now so that way they can introduce us to the anthology and tell us a little bit more about the project, which I'm honored to also be included in. But this isn't about me. This is about everybody else tonight. So I'm going to pass it to Alan.
Welcome, everybody, to the digital stage. Thank you so much for being a witness to us today. When Language Broke Open kind of started as a thought. I remember one time I was walking down the lake with a friend, and I was mentioning the Afro-Uruguayan periodicals, which are the longest running Black Uruguayan newspapers to date, titled Nuestra Raza, and they ran for about 20-ish something years. And I was thinking about the Black Panther newspaper. And in this talk with my friend, I mentioned something along the lines of, I wish there was an archive or a periodical for queer and trans Black folk in the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. And it's kind of how this idea of the anthology came together. The call for papers went out in 2020, and it took about 3 years for the anthology to come together. There are 45 writers included from various regions of both the US, the Antilles, and the connected Latin American countries. Some of us were born in Latin America, some of us are living in diaspora, and some of us have multiple heritages, not just to this continent, but other continents, which I think really gives the anthology a widespread range of who we are. And I want to read like a very short excerpt from the coda, just to situate all of us in this space together. When Language Broke Open is not just an edited volume, it is an object, an archive, and a document that speaks to different geographic, temporal, and ideological understandings of Black aliveness by people who are queer and or trans of Latin American descent. Here, I use Black aliveness in reference to the work of Black cultural and literary studies scholar Kevin E. Quashie, who argues that, quote, To behold such aliveness, we have to imagine a Black world. We have to imagine a Black world as to surpass the everywhere and every way of Black death, of Blackness that is understood only through such vocabulary, end quote. Documentation is something not all of us have had. Some of us were born in countries where archives of Black Latin American, Afro Latinx, and or Afro Caribbean families, resistance movements, and newspapers were seen as threats and burned, erased, or hidden. Others grew up in geographies where we were told our kin didn't have a history, a story, or a place in the community. And some of us quite literally grew up undocumented, without legal permission to reside in the United States or in the Latin American and Caribbean countries our families saw themselves forced to migrate to. Therefore, this collection does the work of counter-documenting not only ourselves as queer and trans Black writers of Latin American descent, but those who came before us, the ones our grandparents never mentioned because of shame or to protect their right to opacity, or those who are always mentioned, but whose stories are curated to leave out the queer, the trans, the agender, the hypersexual, the non-sexual, and our darker skinned relatives, because after all, colorism thrives in Black communities. I wanted to open with this because I want us to communally engage a Black aliveness that centers queer and trans futurities. And I think that the readers who we are going to hear from today really bring that out and demand that in their essays and in their poetic articulations. So I'm excited for you to witness them and for us to have like a little bit of a dialogue. Thank you.
And without further ado, because I want everyone to be able to enjoy as much reading from as many of these incredible artists and activists and human beings as possible, I'm going to introduce Malika Aisha. They keep their bio very simple. Malika Aisha is a queer Afro-Latinx poet born and raised in Bushwick, Brooklyn, with a BA in English language and literature from Ithaca College. Thank you for being with us, Malika. Can't wait to hear you read.
Thank
Let
you.
me translate the screen so everyone can see your beautiful self. It's all
Thank
you.
you. I need to try to learn how to be a little less humble. I'm gonna brag enough soon. But hello everyone. I'm Malika Aisha. As you know, published in When Language Broke Open. That's where a lot of people have been introduced to my work and also to my grandmother. And I do want to start off with one of my favorite poems, which was written with her in mind of just personal experiences being Afro Latinx. So this is called La Negrita. I laugh at the punchline because I know to. Everyone is laughing, so it's a safe assumption. People probably know I'm faking. They probably know I didn't catch what's funny. Sometimes people stop to explain, but I cut them off before they can finish so I can tell them I know, I understand. What else can live here if not my grandmother's language? My Spanish 101 teacher in college was a Spaniard. He told me not knowing Spanish means you're not a real Latina, despite being Puerto Rican. Espanol 101. I am ashamed. Again, I am made a growing void without language. My grandma shouts me negrita when she hugs me, she sways. It's as if instinct takes her and she becomes an island. Here, there is warmth and waves. As she sways like the trees, I imagine her sitting beneath in Salinas, sun blazing and wind carrying, black 101. Once, I asked her how to say brown in Spanish. She shrugged, said brown. I failed my Spanish test the next day. When I came back from Panama, I said my first Spanish sentence to her. She stared, hoped I would repeat myself until I caught my tongue. She laughed. I blushed. I am just like her. Cheekbones rounded high, beneath the eye she gave to my mother, then to me. her skin brown like mine. My twin, she says. You don't get it from your mother. You look like me. Grandma's hands shake now, and she's much smaller. Excuse me. But her fists still carry, her laugh still echoes like she knows something you don't. Every room is filled with the smell of musk oil, the one she'd buy off Knickerbocker. Its scent would linger long after she left a room and fall into nostalgia like a safety blanket. Bendición, I say. Dios te acompañe, she responds, filling the hole that continues to grow inside me, calling me home. Um, yeah, that anecdote about my Spanish class is my favorite one because I definitely did not do well in that class, especially after she said brown. um, and with the rest of my pieces, I have been navigating what it looks like to grieve and grief, uh, like finding the joy in grief, realizing the anger in grief, and also coming to a peace in grief. Um, so, want to give at least that warning for those who may be also experiencing grief and might want to step away. But there's a lot to find in it. And I'd like to start with the ghosts in our laughter. There are empty spaces around me that I mourn, and I haven't sorted out what kind of grief it is. To accept death, to move on, and to continue seeing the gap in the crook of my arm, at the seat in the bar, on the long ride home at 2 a.m. Sometimes it's just too quiet. Then I think of laughter, how a black girl shows all her teeth, the rattle of rib cages after a black boy's booming shouts, and I laugh silently, mouth wide and no noise, slight wheeze as if I've been waiting for joy to fill that void and make something for me. Of mad libs of onomatopoeias, just to understand the grief of a laugh never realized, the pain in the belly of one who has learned that love can look this way too, and tears can come this way, and that it will not hurt the same. Even if my arms wrap around my waist, I can cry, and it does not have to come with shame. Um, and that came after a long period of grieving one of my best friends that is my brother, and he's alive, and he brings me joy in just even memory. Um, this next piece, I feel I can continue adding to as I continue witnessing harm. And I think living in a time where doom scrolling is almost endless, it's hard to avoid. So here I go with There Are Screams in Our National Anthem. Oh, say, does that star-spangled wave tell me where you hid the bodies? After the levees broke, tell me where you hid the bodies. I saw a child with severed limbs yesterday, bones and flesh ripped open by your weapons. Tell me where you hid the bodies. People in Flint cannot drink the water. There is poison in our water. Tell me where you hid the bodies. A black boy laid bleeding on the ground for 4 hours in Missouri. The concrete swallowed the oceans that came from him. Tell me where you hid the bodies. I cannot afford to be sick. I cannot afford to stay in my home. Tell me where you hid the bodies. Patrol officers whipped Haitians at the borders and left families in cages to cook under desert sun. Tell me where you hid the bodies, home of the free land of the brave. Hiding behind tanks, drinking oil, pillaging for gold. I've never met a hungrier beast. Tell me where the bodies are. The air is full of smoke, and the forests are dying, and the ice is melting, and police are building a city over the soil. Tortuguita ley, tell me where you hid the bodies. People have laid on doctors' tables, their uterus on another, never knowing they have lost their family, never knowing they have lost a choice. Tell me where the bodies are. There have been many ways to kill a dream. One was on a hotel balcony, then hospital bed. Another is this, a slow murder of a people who do not always know they are dying. Tell me where the bodies are. Um, thank you.
Thank you, Malika. That story about school and the refusal of the professor to like acknowledge not only their own harm, but the experience reminds me of an experience I had in a Spanish class with an Argentinian teacher that told me that there were no Black people in Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a project where we could invite someone to speak. So I invited an Afro-Argentino DJ, and she tried to fail me. She was so upset. And these experiences of, being inflicted different moments of death are so, pervasive. But, in your work, there's this like strength of witnessing clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And in that clarity, there's beauty. Beauty is not only using language to soften. Sometimes beauty is like the clarity of a knife, and I appreciate the work you shared.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, y'all.
No, I'm happy that you're all here. I'm like very excited, very excited. Our next reader is Johaida Calvin, pronouns he, him. Johaida Calvin is a memory worker, writer, and zine maker from Chicago. Love a zine, love a good zine. Johaida is the archives assistant for the Johnson Publishing Company Archive and a fellow in the University of Alabama's Social Justice for Archivists Master of Library and Information Studies program, focusing on memory work by and for queer or trans Black people and people of color. Thank you for your work, Johaida.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for organizing this event. I'm really grateful to be in this space with the other writers and with Alan. I'm really grateful for this anthology. I started writing the poems for this anthology at the beginning of 3 years of also a lot of grief, a lot of accumulating grief in my family. I was recently reminded by my therapist that I'm an archivist because grief work is like my life's work. And my poetry is definitely part of that. I started writing poems to my granny and about my granny when she passed away as a child. So I feel like this is just a long lineage of me grieving through writing. And I'm going to read from the anthology the 2 poems of mine that are towards the end. And then I'm going to read a little notes app poem that's only on my Finsta that I feel like kind of more accurately reflects the trajectory of the grief that I was writing about in these poems, with a lot of hope and how that's kind of changed with a lot of the despair that I think almost everyone I know is fighting through right now. And this first one means a lot to me. It meant a lot to me to see this poem in the anthology when it came out. I talk about my older brother who was incarcerated at the time that I wrote this, and I'm very happy to say that he got out of prison just a couple years ago, and being able to see this poem knowing that he's, safe and home with our family meant a lot to me. This one's called Castillo San Cristobal. Can you guess what this room is? The damp air sticks to my skin, the walls are stained, the light from the hallway seems to dim, my breath quickens. Shivering, I wonder if you can see my exhale, but of course it's too dark. My bones tug in pain, the shift from hot humidity to cold wet triggers a memory. Saben? My spirit knows cells. The feeling lives in my body, has done so for many lifetimes. It knew it in the ships, in the belly of the whale. I knew it when we ran away together, cuando seguimos a Júpiter, en el cielo, hasta que nos reunimos, pensando que era la estrella del norte. And in this life, running from mania to depression to dysphoria to fear of hospitalization to a subconscious memory of a past life spent alone. The possibility of incarceration is as high as the tallest tree I have ever prayed to. In this life, my brother calls me from his cell, and when I see him in his orange shirt, I can't help but break down before he can even greet me. I tell him nothing is wrong when he asks, that I just miss him, that it's been so long. It's this longing that I have the deepest memory of. Las vibraciones han grabado estos secretos en mis vértebras. Cuando me duele, me acuerdo. In the next life, there are no cells to hold my brother, no cells to hold me, no more longing, no more emptiness, just the sound of a last exhale giving way to a cry of birth. It's also kind of surreal reading that last part. My older sister, is giving birth to her second baby literally next week. So it's crazy to see all the life that comes with, I don't know, all the grief. The next one I'm going to read from the anthology is called Prophecy. 1. Before. I speak with the rhythm of the waves to open up the portal, to let the lake guide us to our dreams of revolution, to a world to come, to the deaths we face, but always to be born again. This is to say, grieve when you need, but always remember to wake up and watch the sun dance on the lake. 2. Here. With my siblings in my hands, I dance left to right, root and breast, into liberation, cantando las canciones que nos dejaron nuestros ancestres, para recordarnos que ellos siempre supieron lo que es la libertad, that this was just some time we had to fight through, that the Creator always had a plan, and if we would just be still and listen to the wind, look to the flicker of the candle, read the reflection in the mirror, we would know. 3. Beginning again. They made up disorders they said made us run, called us crazy when we heard our ancestors. But one day we rose up and finally saw ourselves, and the archive in our bodies reminded us that we always knew how to be free. Tomorrow, as ancestors, we blow the smoke of the incense to catch your attention and let you know que siempre estaremos aquí, que nunca nos iremos, porque vivimos a través de ti, juntos contigo, para toda la eternidad. This notes app poem I'm going to read, I wrote in July of this year after a very traumatic death in my family, and really just trying to sit with not losing a lot of the hope that I used to have, but trying to reframe it with the realities that me and my family and my chosen family are living through. 5:30 a.m. So lonely, I can't even kill the moths flying around my apartment. I like the company, having something alive other than myself in this too big for me space. I've lost 3 family members and 1 dog in the last 3 years. At one point, I was again thinking about getting married. I changed genders and names, had surgery and hormone therapy, started learning how my brain works, pursued a career that is both keeping me alive and killing me. I've fallen in a bit of love here and there, rarely lasting. I've longed for the 2 people who I'm deeply, irrevocably in love with and only seen them a handful of times. I slept for 3 hours last night, maybe just 1. Woke up at 4, went on my phone, watched my favorite episode of my favorite show and cried. Missed everyone, missed every time, missed everything. Came out to smoke and watch the sunrise while stooping on my front doorstep. I'm shaking, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm sleep deprived. I cannot for the life of me imagine how things will be okay, but I have faith that they will be. Misguided maybe, but what else is there? At this point, after all this, knowing so much more is on its way. Thank you guys for letting me be a little bit vulnerable with you tonight, and thank you for having me.
That's there's such like a deep need, like almost like it's like a desperate need for that kind of radical vulnerability, right? Because if people don't know what's happening to you, then they can't realize that they can also kind of join in and like get support and be a part of like a community that can help heal. And I'm especially grateful to hear your poem about your brother. My own brother passed while incarcerated in 2022. And so it brings me an extreme amount of joy to hear that you can experience your sibling in like a liberatory space. So I thank you for that.
Thank
And
you.
anyone that has anything to like jump in and say, please feel welcome to like join the conversation. It's not just about, but you're all welcome to like comment.
I want to add that the two poems that you read from the anthology are in the future section. And there's something about the grief in those two poems that really allowed us how to imagine a future, especially the future about the poem about your brother, where you talk about no more cells and a alternative futurity where both of you can live well, which puts into question the world that we inherited. So I just want to like uplift that again and talk about the uses of grief in imagining futures.
Thank you, Alan. Another amazing human being to introduce, Louis A. Ortiz Fonseca, is an HIV positive queer Afro-Boricua award-winning HIV activist and artist. He is the creator of The Gran Varones, a digital storytelling project that amplifies Latinx and Black queer history. Louis is also the host of the YouTube series for LGBTQ youth, Kikis with Louis. I can't wait to hear your work as well. Let me get the spotlight on you.
Hey, y'all. Just want to say, thank you, Alan, for extending the invitation to submit something. I'm always nervous to submit stuff. Like rejection is, I know people say toughen your skin. Maybe in the next lifetime. This lifetime, I don't think I'm able to do that. And then, shout out to being to all the organizers of this event and writers. I'm so humbled and filled with gratitude to be included, to share time and space with you all. I wasn't sure which piece to read because I didn't realize that both pieces are kind of like hard opens with, naming my mother's struggle with crack addiction. So I was talking to a friend. I was like, do I read the one that starts out, my mother started smoking crack in 1986, or do I start out with the one that at the height of my mother's crack addiction? And I had not even realized that both pieces I submitted started very similarly. But I'm going to read a piece called The Things That Miss Tina Taught Me. Hopefully I can get through this without crying. Every time I read this, I cry, which is why I try not to read it. And I've tried to read it a couple of times to like get the cry out of me. But we'll see. So this is a piece in honor of Tina, who was a Black trans woman. That was my mother's best friend in the late 80s. It was the late 80s and at the height of my mother's crack addiction. If my memory serves me correctly, it was the height of my entire neighborhood's crack addiction. In many ways, the crack epidemic was the equalizer in our neighborhood. My mother had friends who were lawyers, blue-collar workers, bikers, and business executives. All of them were addicts. I watched them roll in and out of our one-bedroom apartment. I never paid them much mind, probably because if I did, I'd get my ass whipped for being nosy. But it was Tina, my mother's best friend, who always left me mesmerized. Tina, I called her Miss Tina, was Black, tall, muscular, and unapologetic about her sometimes revealing 5 o'clock shadow. She often referred to it as her daytime look. I studied her like I should have been studying my math homework. I wanted to identify what it was that made her seem so magical because I wanted it for myself. I wanted to be as fabulous as Miss Tina. She'd visit my mother at least twice a day, once after work when she would show up wearing a hard hat, jeans, and construction boots, and then again later that night when she'd show up looking like our neighborhood's own Donna Summer. This transformation always inspired me. She was my first tangible proof that we create our own beauty and we choose what we become. I'd ask her questions about her nails and her shoes, but what I really wanted to ask her was how to beat up the boys who called me names. I was too scared to admit that even at 8 years old, I was called faggot at school. So my questions were in code. Instead of asking, how do you deal with people teasing you? I'd ask, how did you get so pretty? Whenever we chatted, however brief the conversation, she made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Tina was God, and I was praying at her altar. One night, I woke up to hear my mom and Tina talking, whispering and crying. Our apartment, which was really just a large room, was divided down the middle by a clothesline and sheets. My brothers and I were in the bed on one side, and my mother and Tina were on the other side, sitting at the table near the kerosene heater. I think you're going to need to go to the hospital, I heard my mother say. I couldn't quite make out what Miss Tina's response was, but from what I could gather from her tone, her answer was an adamant refusal. The conversation and the crying continued. I peeked through the sheets and saw Miss Tina's bloodied and swollen face. I wanted to ask what happened, but even then I knew she got beat up for being herself, just like I got beat up at school. Miss Tina was brave enough to tell someone, my mother. I suppose that should have inspired me to tell my mother about the violence that I faced, but I didn't. I never did. As I got older, Miss Tina and I developed our own friendship. We talked about Janet Jackson, fighting against homophobes, and AIDS. We talked about the night she showed up bloodied in our room. She told me about the many times she showed up bloodied somewhere and found ways of performing her own triage. She told me how she endured. Make every fight of your life the fight of your life, honey. She told me to never do drugs or get AIDS. She made me promise. I promised. In the late 1980s, that was the only prevention there was to give young gay boys. Demands to never get AIDS. While I didn't understand completely what Tina was asking of me, I knew exactly what she was saying. When you're a young gay boy, you look for the hints and clues. You learn to read between the lines. This was the language Tina and I spoke. Miss Tina died of AIDS complications in 1996. She passed away quietly. There was no wailing or explicit mourning. People spoke about her death as a matter of fact. I can't blame them. By that time, there was an estimated 23 million people living with HIV worldwide. While advances in HIV treatment had just become available and were all resurrecting people who were expected to die, AIDS was still ravaging Black, Latinx, poor, and LGBTQ communities. Trauma and shame meant many of us didn't talk with our families about AIDS and death. During one of our last conversations I remember having with Tina, she shared stories of her friends, so many friends who had succumbed to AIDS complications and were buried in shame. She painted me a real life picture that I had only seen in made for TV movies and would possibly eventually experience myself. It has been more than 20 years since Tina's passing. It was only through writing this piece I remember the promise I made to her. I didn't keep it. I tried drugs and I discovered they weren't my thing. I have been living with HIV for more than 10 years. And if this was 1996, I'd be considered a long term survivor or a medical miracle. But Tina wasn't really asking me to promise to abstain. She was telling me to live. Tina knew even before I had officially come out to her that I was in need of direction and helpful hints that could and would eventually save my life. I have never once felt that I have broken my promise that I made. I have lived. 4 decades since the onset of the AIDS epidemic and more than 15 years since after Tina's death, effective treatment and care have helped make HIV a survivable condition. We now have PrEP, the daily pill that helps prevent HIV infection. It would all seem like science fiction to Tina and the little boy she knowingly and unknowingly saved. All this living. Today I'm older than Tina when she died. I still talk about Janet Jackson. I still fight homophobes, and I'm still fighting AIDS. I perform my own triage when stigma, shame, and blame leave me wounded. I even, through my own advocacy, have the privilege of providing LGBTQ youth the same direction and guidance Tina once gifted me. I'm thriving. That, after all, was the real promise I made to her. And yeah, so shout out to Tina. And I'll read my second piece that I think I can get through. Same time frame. A lot of the writing I do, I write a lot about music. So that's why Janet Jackson's in here. So that is like how I remember stuff through pop culture. And like remembering what it was to live in that era, the Reagan era, and surviving crack and surviving AIDS. And my hope is that my writing contributes that we never forget those times, and especially how it impacted Black and Puerto Rican families. So this piece is called From Under a Crack Rock, Surviving the Reagan Years. My mom began smoking crack in the summer of 1986. At that time, it was widely known as crack rock. I was 9 years old and I had already mastered the art of secrecy. I didn't call it art or survival. It was just life under the rock. I learned many things that summer that would forever change me. I learned to check the spoons for burned residues before using them. I taught my brothers to do the same. I learned to hide the single speaker radio before going to school. I taught my brothers to do the same. I learned to play in the dark when the electricity was cut off. I learned that people were more comfortable calling my mother a crackhead in front of our young eyes and ears. I learned to grow numb, and I taught my brothers to do the same. The greatest lesson I learned was not to be ashamed of my mother. Trust me when I say that this was no easy task during a time when life was polarized by dichotomies of clean, dirty, crackhead, or human. These lessons sustained our society, my sanity. These lessons fortified me along with millions of Black and Latinx families in the 1980s and 90s who tried to survive life under the rock. Being the oldest child, I was charged with ensuring that my brothers were fed and taken care of. While I resented the responsibility, it provided me a kind of access to my mother that my brothers didn't have. After coming down from a high, she would wake me up from sleep to play board games with her at 2 a.m. She would tell me about how AIDS had stolen her friends and how badly she missed them. She would tell me that I was the good one and it was my responsibility to keep my brother Nicholas out of trouble. We talked about pretty much everything except life under the rock. It was difficult for anyone in my neighborhood to call anyone's mom a crackhead without quickly being reminded that their mother too was a crackhead. So the insults had to be more specific. Hairs had to be split. Well, at least my mother didn't sell the TV. Well, at least we have food in the house. Life under the rock impacted even how we played the dozens. My brothers and I were lucky in a sense. Our mother neither sold the TV nor left us without food, and we found solace in that. I believe that this alone helped us to survive whatever dignity we had left as I watched the will to live disappear from the eyes of other kids living and being surrounded by crack addiction. According to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, more than 1,000 stories about crack appeared in the press in 1986, with NBC airing over 400 reports on the crack epidemic alone. The media coverage was instrumental in shaping the nation's perception of those who struggled with and or were directly impacted by the epidemic. This perception has since been inherited by a new generation of HIV activists and advocates who only associate the presidency of Ronald Reagan with his failure to respond to AIDS. But those who survived the Reagan years also associate that time with the government's swift and violent response to crack, which stole the lives and promise of many, deliberately destroying Black and brown families. Over 30 years later, the conversation about addiction has shifted dramatically. The same government that demonized, dehumanized, and then criminalized people like my mother now urges us to remember that people struggling with addiction have a disease and require love, patience, and treatment. This reminder comes as the face of addiction is now of white, affluent young people struggling with heroin addiction. This compassion, while critical and necessary, was not available to Black and Brown communities that struggle with the presence of crack. I would venture to say that this approach is still not available to individuals who struggle in the shadows of crack addiction. Yes, it is important that we evolve as a society, and it's equally as important as we make amends with ourselves for allowing this to for allowing this to happen on our watch. Even more importantly, we cannot validate our evolution without true account of what happened, who it happened to, and why it happened in the first place. I have come a long way from that small room I shared with my mother and my brothers. I no longer have to check the spoons for burn residue, and I no longer have family to bear witness to the atrocities we survived. My mother struggled with addiction until her death. My brother was murdered in 2001. I sometimes struggle with survivor's guilt. This is not common for those who have survived war. Every day I'm learning to reconcile my survival with the sacrifices that my mother and my brother made so that I can live life from under a rock. Atonement is often the last act of a complete apology. As a nation, how do we atone for the heinous behavior of the government during the Reagan years? It's simple. We do not ignore the heroes of my generation. Instead, we honor the legacies of my mother and every mother who provided light in the darkest days of the war raised against our families. We memorialize them like we do all of the heroes we lost in a battle. Thank you. And that concludes my trauma talk for this Friday.
Thank you so much, Louis. I appreciate you ending with like irreverence, because I think that's my favorite part of life. Is like I love irreverence as humor, and I love irreverent people. So I appreciate that, and I think that while your pieces are consistently timely since the crack epidemic, I think what stands out to me is how clear it is that certain people get certain emotions based on how society values their worth. And so not everybody gets empathy, not everybody gets understanding. And so much of that is like systematized into people, trained into people through the 400 news stories, the 1,000 publications that disable our ability to be human with one another, ashe te tiatina, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your work a lot. Thank you so much. And now I get to introduce Tirsa. Tirsa Shepherd is a Black lesbian of Caribbean, Black Southern, and Panamanian heritage. Through her artwork, spanning many mediums, she aims to share diverse and intersectional stories. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with loved ones, studying Brazilian Portuguese, dancing, cooking, and daydreaming of a world where Black people are free. Thank you for being with us, Tirsa.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Really grateful to be here. Thank you, Alan, again, for inclusion in the anthology. And it's wonderful to hear and meet the rest of the poets, or contributors, I should say. And Louis, that was very beautiful. Your admiration of Miss Tina is palpable. And I was really emotional on this side. Thank you so much for sharing her legacy with all of us. I will be reading my poems that are in the anthology underneath the memory section. And I'm noticing a theme here, but my first poem that I'll read is called Haiku for Great Grandma Cooley, and it's from the Generations. Puckered, soft, wet lips, cloud of wrinkly brown skin, bowl of peppermint. From behind the kitchen curtain, we hear the chants, bumbity bumbity, oh Lord. When we ask, Cools, what you cooking for lunch? Your sharp tongue sings, Ya mudda balls and ya fada poom poom. You spit on the pavement where I must kneel on a grater if I don't return home before it dries. A series of dream visitations, I collect and recycle memories to piece together a you for me. I'll just quickly talk a little bit about my great-grandma Cooley. She is still to this day like the biggest conversation in my family. She was just that girl, really. And I enjoy learning about her more and more through each of my family members. And yeah, I really enjoyed putting this poem together and just honoring her and remembering her from each person in my family as well as myself. And the next poem I'll be reading is called To Grandma Nita. And I'll just read this one. Sometimes I think about the nights I don't remember, retold stories that I've carefully hoarded over the years. I wonder how you would fit into my life now. I have no scent to remember you by, but when I close my eyes, I feel your presence, like warm humidity kissing my cheeks. Every spring, we bake a cake in your honor, and as the calendar passes over your birth date, I'm reminded to worry about the security of this overutilized password. Every now and then, I stumble upon a forgotten memory. I pick it up, gripping it with clammy hands, afraid it will be permanently lost should I put it down again. Shake it, señorita, I hum, desperate to remember your face. Concentrating, I look out from my car seat, but when I look up, all I see is your framed portrait from our living room. At 7, I lie in bed with my mother as we read aloud together. Suddenly, her breath is heavied and shallowed. I feel her chest tremble, and I see her face drenched in tears. How does one console their mother? To Miss Tirza Danielle from Grandma Nita, you wrote. I wind up the music box, yet again mesmerized by the comb grazing the pimpled pin drum. I divert my attention to your handwriting, stroking the faded sticker as warm droplets form on my face. This is another beautiful woman of my family, my Grandma Nita. And another person that I know mostly through stories told to me and, the few memories I have as a child. And I'm really grateful to be able to honor both of my grandmother and my great-grandmother in this anthology and to share that with the world. And the final poem I'll be reading is called Rainbow Rosary. My mother hands me a plastic rainbow rosary. Cooley wanted you to have this, she decides. I roll the beads between my fingers as I wonder if Cooley somehow foresaw my queerness. Creo que mi bisabuela era bruja, I whisper. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Tirsa. My great-grandmother, when we used to ask her what she was cooking, she'd be like, mierda. Like, you're not cooking it. You didn't do the shopping. Don't ask me. You're going to eat it.
Right.
I think one of my favorite parts of the reading, aside from getting to meet all of you virtually, is feeling like an expansion of family. Like all of the people important to us are kind of sharing in like this kind of spectral space that we kind of call the internet in that kind of way. They call it the internet, you call it something else, right? It's like, there's that concept of like kalunga, that scrim, that fluid scrim between being your physical self and your non-physical self, that death is like a snap of the finger and you can pass on either side. And sometimes when the internet is good, it feels like that's kind of happening, you know, like that you can have like this expansion of like space. So thank you to everyone for bringing your people, your people with you to be with all of us. And, you know, last but for certain, not least, just because we're going in alphabetical order to try to make it as fair as possible, a welcome to Ivanova. Ivanova Veras de Jesus, El LD, is a Black queer artist, activist, and researcher. They are co-creator of the podcast Hablamos del Arte, ARD. They co-facilitate QTPOC Plus Family Circle, a space for queer trans people of color and families. Ivanova researches psychoneuroimmunology. Psychoneuroimmunology, it's a Jeopardy point, right? To look at that. Effects of the psychoneuroimmunological effects of stress within historically marginalized communities. They deeply believe in the transformative power of love, art, and community, and so are extremely appreciated in the space. We're excited to hear from you, Ivanova.
Thank you. Oh my God, I just got really big in the screen. Hello, I will be reading 3 poems, 2 of them from my contributions to the anthology. I very much saw Alan post the call for artists and writers and poets, and I dismissed it several times. Several people sent it to me being like, oh, you should send something. And I was like, nah. And then the last day, the day the things were due, I was like, fuck it. And like, I sat down and like wrote and I sent it and I forgot about it. And so when Alan wrote to me, I was like quite shocked that anything that I wrote was being considered to be included. So that's how that started. The first poem I'm going to read from the anthology is called We Win. In the mountains, there are plants and fruits and cows and chickens and fresh air and us. Now, we constantly seek change. We don't run from it. It moves us forward. Back then, we wished to be free. We chanted, we fought. Every hope, every drop of blood, and still, we never imagined this. They are not killing us anymore. We sit together and heal. We walk side by side, dream by dream. Being alive is no longer radical nor extreme. It is inevitable. The present is eternity and forever is queer, Black, joyful, trans, safe, honest, authentic. The present is open, raw, heartfelt, shame-free, accountability-driven. The present is tender, bittersweet, respect, ocean deep, adorable, relief, certainty, shapeless. The present is unconditional love, family holding space, hands holding each other, vulnerability protecting change. The present is community-based, equity-centered, fear-free, and it is ours. Now, on to the next. The next one I'm going to read, and this goes very much in like the, I guess, the theme we all surprisingly decided on today. It's called Where is Home? And it also goes into talking about easily the most important person in my life, which is my grandma, my maternal grandma. The sun is right on my face. The dirt is right on my face. I close my eyes. We need to rest. With my eyes closed, I see Mama, my grandma. I see her heavy. The weight of the world lands on her back. The colonizers say she was born dirty. She never forgets. She's never allowed to. They don't get the majestic of her black skin. I smell the sweat running down her neck. My neck? I feel her calluses on my feet. Her cloudy hands are my own. My lips form an O, and her whistle comes out, guiding the wind, making trees grow, directing the rain. Our knees are hurting, and so are our souls. I wonder, who were you before they told you who to be? Which parts of you are missing? What dreams were deemed too big? How often was love denied to you? How are you standing? Where are we anyway? Why I hear a voice telling me I don't belong? Is that their voice? Then why is it inside me? Did I swallow it? How do I shut it out? Mama, mamita, mi sol, where is home? And how did we get here? Why do my roots hurt? Do I really die if I cut them off? What exact amount of strength have we built? How are we still standing? With my eyes still closed, I am reunited with Mama and her grandparents, and their grandparents, and their grandparents. I recognize every face, every step. I feel every river inside of me where they belong, home. And then the last poem I'm going to read came to me a couple of days ago, actually. It's not even finished, but there's one of my ancestors is like, you really need to read this right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and read this unfinished poem. It is called Maybe. Maybe God doesn't play any instruments. Maybe God doesn't decide what happens, when or to who. Maybe God is just tired. Maybe God needs help. Maybe God is lonely. Maybe God is that big, heavy feeling in your gut. Maybe God is an angry Black woman. Maybe God is a Black trans disabled femme who gets denied bathroom access at a gas station in Oregon and then again at a McDonald's in California. Maybe God is the love you feel for children and rain and rainbows. Maybe God is the love you feel for yourself. Maybe God doesn't believe in borders or citizenships. Maybe God is disappointed at your violence, at your avarice, at your carelessness, at your denial, at your anti-Blackness. Maybe God is not everywhere, and maybe they don't know it all. Maybe God likes bedtime stories and nightlights. Maybe he loves Swiss Miss hot chocolate even when it's hot outside. Maybe she's not coming back. Maybe she never left. Maybe God is this poem and the one you wrote or thought about writing. Maybe God exists.
Okay, we got a little bit of time, and I'm gonna have to put Alan on the spot as the editor. Alan has to absolutely share something.
Oh my goodness. Hello, everybody. I guess I'll share the piece, the one piece I have in the anthology. It's titled When Dreaming of a Future Means Letting Go. In the future, there are no more nations, no countries, no conquered land. There is only us. And when there are no more corporations or governments or nation states to blame, we'll have to learn to be accountable to one another and face some of the worst parts of who we once were. One day, we will address the violent myth of mestizaje, the romanization of conquest, and the logic that made many believe that Europe made us better. And it'll finally be easy to be Black in Latin America. Those of us who are indigenous will speak our languages and no longer be punished for it. Asian Latinas will no longer be asked for papers. Stereotypes about Chinos will be eradicated. All Caribbean peoples will be able to travel freely, and those sick, fat, and disabled people will live lives full of care and tenderness. In the future, centuries will pass without a single queer or trans hate crime. The world will forget they existed. A sign that we finally learned to honor life. In the future, we will look at ourselves in a mirror and say, fuck, I wasn't always a good relative. And it'll be hard. And it will never get any easier because building a world outside of violence requires daily commitment and work. I am inviting you to dream with me. I am asking you to believe in the reality that there is so much more to live for than nationalism, so much more to strive for and families to build outside of cis heterosexuality, so much care available that we finally stop feeling shame for asking to be loved. I am asking you to believe in the reality that we have never needed nations to be human, that we have never needed papers to be human, that we have never needed governments to be human, that we have never needed to speak the same language to be human. In the future, there is no abstract Latinidad, because that requires us to hold on to all the stories we tell about one another. And not many include Black, Indigenous, Asian, sick, fat, disabled, or queer and trans skin. In the future, there is no abstract Latinidad. Instead, there is accountability, daily practices of abolition, courageous conversations that are valued, and radical epistemological changes, because that creates power and community care. I want all of us to be alive in that future. But are you ready for all we must do to get there? What will you commit to? Will you give up all your fantasies of unity? Will you give up your power, your wealth, your status? Who will you be, and how will you show up when all that is left is each other and the actions we took that we never dared be accountable to? Thank you.
Let's get everybody on mute so we can give it an audible clap so everyone can
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I am so grateful for you all. I feel very special and like chosen to share the space of this publication with you all and share this space with you. Everybody find these individuals on social media if they've chosen to participate in that community. Follow their work, keep up with what they're doing, research the organizations that they're a part of, reach out, support those organizations, either through donations or volunteering or going to learn something that you didn't know before that will help you care for someone in a new and inventive way. And as we all know, and I hope acknowledge, now is the time, as Alan has asked us, to figure out what we are willing to do to sacrifice to make a safe future for everybody, to make and manifest a future that is focused on care, harm reduction, liberation, freedom, and having everyone have access to the best of what this existence has to offer. And it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take a lot of understanding. I think it's Bernice Reagan, coalition is not easy, but it's something that we all must commit to. And I'm very grateful to you all. I want everyone to have a, spiritually and emotionally productive weekend, whether that means having fun and crashing out in a positive way, or whether that means just taking space for yourself. And with all the love and appreciation in the world, you all are amazing, and good night to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night, y'all.
Night.